cold or we're in a sales process, right? We're like, all right, now what I want you to do is pay attention to me and get on my calendar. Who cares? Your calendar is the least of my interest right now. But if I can send you a blog post that directly speaks to the things I know that you're interested in, my level of engagement goes up because it's relevant. It's relevant to the things that they care about. And that's really what we have to be thinking about as marketers.
Nick, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Yeah, I'm psyched to be here. Thank you.
Most certainly. I've looked at kind of your resume and your LinkedIn profile. I've saw that you've got a couple of other ventures that you've started, and you're on to this second tech company that you're building based in Massachusetts. So clearly you've had some success in building and growing companies. You've worked at some reputable brands in both sales and in the marketing and in some other strategic functions before. So obviously there's been some life experience that brought you to where you are. So can you share with our audience a little bit about your journey of becoming an entrepreneur?
Oh, yeah, happy to. So I had a lot of fun initially coming out of school and being a phone jockey, SDR, BDR. I've been there. I have deep empathy for all those who continue to do it. And I think everybody ought to be doing it at some point in their career to have some real understanding of how hard it is to create pipeline. Found myself in outside sales roles. And as I was in outside sales, my approach was a little different than the average bear. I was always a marketer working inside of a salesperson's role. So I remember back 20 years ago, I was the first person in my cohort at a fairly large company to use the mail merge function in Outlook. Like back before there were marketing automation systems, I said, I worked really hard on this messaging and this email. I wonder, oh my God, I can send it to 100 people right now. This is great. And then it would go out and the meetings would come in and everything would work really well. And so I got really obsessed with the content side and understanding the right things to say. And in particular, started to really fall in love with product. And back before product-led sales or product-led growth was a thing, big enterprises got really excited about having sales engineers, people who would come in and try to manifest the value proposition before somebody became a customer. And I was absolutely convinced that's where I wanted to live the rest of my life. And after a company where I'd finally gotten into a fairly senior leadership role within WPP, our division got bought out. I started to think about what my next journey might be. Was super passionate about this idea of personalization in the higher education market and decided, you know what, it's time. It's either now or it's never. And so I took the lead.
So that's how you got to where you are in terms of your current business venture. So now you're running this new company. It's called Air Traffic Control. So can you tell us the genesis for that idea, for that product?
Yeah, absolutely. So the last business that I built was a marketing automation platform, but it was very vertical specific. It was dedicated to communicating with donors and alumni and things like that, initially of large universities. And then we started brokering into some other nonprofit channels. And the big idea there was if we can connect the dots between a human's interests and what this organization has to share, we can probably increase engagement. And we were absolutely right. The problem was that we spent a lot of time working on all these surrounding features, emails and content management and all this other kind of stuff. And after we sold that company, it took a little bit of a breather. And it occurred to me that most of these other tools had these really robust APIs, the HubSpots and the MailChimps and the Marketos and Pardots. They had these incredible APIs that would let you do almost anything that you could dream up. And so we started to poke around and realized that you could actually take the content inside of an organization, understand it in a really deep way thanks to machine learning, and then build these interest graphs by connecting through the APIs. Rather than trying to build a better mousetrap, we said, geez, look at HubSpot, right? They've got 600,000 customers. Feels like it would be a lot more fun and a lot more impactful to bridge the last 10 yards on that personalization problem through a customer base of 500,000 people, organizations, than it would be to try to outbuild a HubSpot who's already 15 years down the road and has unbelievable resources to have created every feature under the sun. So we got going on that. The thesis played out. People were really interested in it. They've invested a ton in content. They've been trying to do personalization. It's immensely difficult. It's an archipelago of problems, right? Tagging, segments, logic rules, and workflows. Ugh, it just breaks, right? It's too much work for humans, but it's a ready-made problem for machine learning. And so we've had a lot of fun, a lot of success over the course of the last year or so, putting that into play.
So what exactly does this technology allows people to do?
Yeah. So it consumes all the content within an organization, your blogs and case studies and white papers and podcasts and things like that. And it says, okay, well, what is that about? And it takes out all the core concepts, ideas, topics that are covered in any one of those pieces of content. And then it looks at all the people that live in someone's marketing system, anybody that's sitting in their HubSpot or Pardot or Salesforce instances, whatever it is. We look at every email open, click, page visit. We pull in social data. We pull in data from the company that they work for, because we're very much in a B2B context. And we build an interest graph. And as a result of knowing what each one of those people is interested in, we know which of that content is most interesting to them. We stick those recommendations right back into the marketing system of choice at that organization, so that when they write an email template or create a landing page or anything else, same way everybody knows how to say dear first name, there's now recommended content available as a new property that they can put into play.
And could that also be in the CMS as well? So if I'm reading a blog, can we personalize the next recommended content?
Absolutely. So we're totally agnostic to both inputs and outputs. There are some that we are pretty reliant on, but a lot of our customers are, for example, full stack HubSpot customers. And so in that case, their entire website can render completely personalized content experiences for every single visitor.
So how is that different from HubSpot's dynamic content or smart content feature though?
Yep. So there's no human intervention here, and this isn't happening at the segment level. So there are a lot of great tools out there that say, hey, look, I know that everybody who's in the manufacturing industry, I have one really cool thing that I want to say to them. We don't have a problem with that. You should keep doing that. There's still lots of value to that, right? Here's our big product value proposition for this persona, right? Mm-hmm. But if you think about all the other content, writing rules that say this persona should see this blog, and then this persona should see this podcast, and then this persona should see this case study, it doesn't hold up, right? That breaks over time. You have to keep revisiting it. And it's largely opinionated. There's not really a very good way. There are some recommendation tools that'll say, we think you have a segment like this that should probably see something like that. And then it lets you wire it up. What we're saying is, I actually know exactly what Samuel's interests are. I know exactly what this content is about, which means I know exactly the right blog to show him, the right podcast to show him. And we're right. And so what we're doing is we're taking that human intervention out, because it's rife with opportunity for messing it up. And B, it frankly just doesn't scale. It's entirely too much work. Even when there's some of those smart elements in there, it's still a ton of effort.
Understood. So basically you have the ability to make an interest graph from their behavior. Is that only on the client's own websites and social platform, or are you also tapping into their social profiles elsewhere on the web?
Yeah, it's great. So yes, we consume professional profile data, what they're posting out there in places like a LinkedIn and how they describe themselves and their roles. And we're totally agnostic, again, to inputs. We have other customers that have proprietary data sets that come in that talk about the way that their websites are performing, or might be coming from a Reddit content stream or something like they might have. We try to sit more at the center of content and contact data, right? We're just thinking about it all in a very different way. Some of that stuff is off the shelf, direct integrations to HubSpot, Pardot, et cetera. And some of it is more reliant on whether or not the customer has had vision as to what other kinds of data would be useful to help inform what someone's interest would be.
Would that then your tool requires the marketer to upload like the profile or the persona first, and then you build their interest graph based on information that you're gathering on the web? Or how does that process work?
So we only know the people that our customer knows. So the way that they get set up is they'll go in and they'll say, oh, I want to connect my marketing system. And there's a button, they sign into the marketing system, and the contacts that are there are the contacts that come into air traffic control. So we don't go out and discover new contacts, right? There are tons of systems that are really good at that. Everything from LinkedIn Sales Navigator to Zoom Info and Apollo and all those different guys. They're great at that. Nobody needs another one of those. But once they do get into the marketing system of record, there's just an absence of insight into what those people are interested in. We're looking at all those behavioral signals and some other things that at scale, like social data and things like that, are otherwise pretty difficult to extract. And we've just really spent a lot of time thinking about how that happens in an automated way.
Understood. So I know you're very a big proponent of this whole concept of personalization versus just being relevant. So talk to us about the big difference between the two and from your perspective.
Yeah, here's my GM. Personalization it's what marketers have been marketing to marketers for 10 years now, right? There's not a marketing system on the planet that doesn't say the word personalization. And they all mean the same thing when they say it. And none of those things are actually personalization, just to be abundantly clear. Segment-based approaches, better than spaghetti against the wall. I'm not going to argue with that. However, that is not to a person, that's to a segment. What we're really doing is, as marketers will do, giving old things new names. And so one of the things that we think is really important about the approach to personalization is the way that it manifests right now. It's a lot of when everybody's got these messages. Oh, Nick, I can see that you're a CEO in Massachusetts of a technology company. I woke up knowing that. That's not helpful. I don't need to know that. If I needed to know that in my inbox, we have way bigger problems than whatever your product or service solves for. So that's the problem. B, it's this approach to personalization that doesn't actually provide any contextual value. It's not saying, hey, as a result, I know that there are hiring limitations in the state of Massachusetts that are really difficult to get around that cause those talent to be more expensive. We've got a solution that specifically helps you lower your headcount costs while still having Massachusetts quality developer talent. Now we're talking. Now that's contextually relevant. And so when we talk about relevance over personalization, what we like to lean into is the content at that company. If you've spent years creating blog posts and podcasts and case studies and all these other types of things, the things that you know about someone shouldn't be these static statements of I know who you are and where you are. That's creepy. That's weird. But that information should fuel what of your content you might share with them. The whole reason we create content is to add value to our prospects and customers. For whatever reason, we completely throw that out the door when we're going out to cold or we're in a sales process, right? We're like, all right, now what I want you to do is pay attention to me and get on my calendar. Well, who cares? Your calendar is the least of my interest right now. But if I can send you a blog post that directly speaks to the things I know that you're interested in, my level of engagement goes up, because it's relevant. It's relevant to the things that they care about. And that's really what we have to be thinking about as marketers.
And then in terms of, obviously is one thing to just be relevant. The other thing is the reach. Some of the problems that we're running into, especially with some of these automation platforms, is the delivery, like the email delivery and the open rate, the engagement of all those emails that have been declining. And come February, there's going to be a lot more stringent rules on that as well. What have you seen to work merging the two, which I know you don't want to be competing with HubSpot and the Marketos of the world and building a delivery system. But how does that actually play a part in getting success?
Yeah, it's a really great question. We're actually getting into a deep dive analysis of this stuff right now to try to put together some helpful resources for people, inclusive of things that we don't touch, right? There's lots of amazing things everybody should be doing that we'll never do as a business, right? When you think about warm-up tools and technical specifications and all these other types of things that tons of marketing teams aren't aware of, aren't doing, right? And you're like, if you don't have LimWarm turned on for $40 a month, you're nuts, right? There are some easy low-hanging fruit things to increase your likelihood of getting delivered. But beyond that, it does go back to relevancy, right? GDPR dictated what is above and below expectations a long time ago by saying, if what you send to somebody is specifically relevant to the recipient, you're good. Let me tell you what's specifically relevant. If I were to sit down and pour over everything that we've ever written in this business and go, Samuel, I feel really good about this. I think if you listen to this podcast, you're going to feel better about how you do your job tomorrow. You've cleared GDPR because GDPR suggests that you have to be relevant. We've been there forever. And that's the same thing that ensures that you don't get marked as spam. No one who has ever done a ton of work preparing for an outbound email to a cold prospect has gotten a spam rejection unless it's from somebody who's just a fundamental jerk about their inbox. You can't control for that. You never will be. They just click everything as spam because they're turds, right? But that's an incredible edge case. But to stay under that new 0.3% spam notification limit that the Google and Yahoo have put in place, look, I'm doing my best here. And you can tell I've done my best because this is actually relevant to you. If you decide it's not valuable to you, That's different. That's not going to wind up in spam. And so I think that's the thing that everybody has to really be focused on is how quickly can I get to a sense of value between me and this prospective customer.
So you mentioned obviously email being one of the delivery medium, but there's also other mediums that you can leverage to get in front of prospective customers. What have you seen to work really well, and how does air traffic control help them in that area?
Yeah, look, I think anybody who's not leaning into thought leadership campaigns on LinkedIn right now is completely missing out. Absolutely missing out. There's a few things that we think are really interesting there. A, just the format generally works well, right? We are now in the B2B creator economy. It is happening. It is here. If you're not participating, you are on the outside 100% and just leaving money on the table. Whether anybody's thinking about air traffic control or not, that is an easy win for any marketing org. Now, beyond that, there are some really fascinating ways that you can promote content on LinkedIn. So you create something great, piece of thought leadership, might be based off an existing piece of content inside of the company, which ATC is really good at identifying what you might want to share out there. Or it might be something brand new, right? This happens to me, probably happens to you. I wake up on a Tuesday and I go, oh my God, and I have an idea. And I don't go to my blog, I go to LinkedIn. And then I pop it down and that works. And I just try to keep consistent. But when you boost that stuff, one of the things that's really powerful on LinkedIn are these custom audiences. And LinkedIn lets you get narrower than any other advertising platform out there with the most valuable prospective customers that you can ever get access to. And you can get right down to groups of 300 people. And so one of the things that we really like doing and our customers have been leveraging ATC for is to say, who are all the people for whom this piece of content has been recommended? And they go and they take the content, they put it up on LinkedIn, they boost it to that custom audience, and they're seeing incredible results, right? 80, 90% decreases in their cost per clicks, massive increases in engagement rates, really powerful stuff. But it's the same idea, right? If I know that this is interesting to this person, I can put it in their inbox. If I know that this thing is interesting to all these people, now I've got an advertising play, and marrying those two things I think is really important, right? It's like, how many different places can I be relevant? And by being relevant on LinkedIn, do I increase how well my other efforts like direct email are performing? The answer is yes. So that thought leadership is the way that you soften the beach up before you start to actually hit people in their inbox.
How much engagement in terms of like comments and likes that you think you need to have before you even do a thought leadership ad on LinkedIn?
You know what? That's a really great question. And I would say 0. If you've got a great concept, that relevancy, look, at a certain point, there's notoriety, there's CEO, CXO brand awareness, right? I know Samuel, I know that guy's smart, he posts a lot. And trust me, over time, this is one of those sustained strategies, it'll work better and better. But if I know that this subject matter is interesting to these 800 people, and I put it in front of them, 9 times out of 10, I'm more relevant than the vast majority of the rest of their feed on LinkedIn when they pop in there. So I'm already giving myself a pretty amazing opportunity to generate some engagement. And worst case scenario, what I've done is I've generated impressions with this C-level executive or subject matter expert, the fact that we exist, and they're going to start to see that more and more often. And my costs are going to continue to come down. My engagement is going to continue to go up. So even from a cold start, the best time to start was yesterday. Second best time to start is today.
Makes sense. So you mentioned the ability to get hyper-focused and targeted in LinkedIn, but from my experience, when you get super focused on LinkedIn, the cost per click tend to go up, not go down. So what's the secret in that, and how do you get that cost to decrease?
Yeah, look, a few things. One, the relevancy is a big deal. Like, I can't stress that enough. Right. There are people who have been subscribing to the New York Times for 60 years, and they read the entire front page every time because it's all the news that you need, right? And they know that. They know the quality is there, and it's a diversity of topics. Now, in a course of relevancy, because we're talking about B2B in particular, you have this really interesting opportunity to shrink down the scope of how many things would be relevant for you to ever talk about to your audience, right? We help with marketing personalization of content across the life cycle. I'm not going to talk about finance. I'm just not, right? I'm not going to talk about corporate real estate. I'm just not. There's no reason for me to do that. Even though it might be in the general vicinity of people that are thinking about what we do, it's not how we help, right? So I can really shrink it down, and that's going to increase my ability to be relevant, which is one of the beautiful things about LinkedIn. But as you start to get beyond that, when you think about other networks, other places that you want to go, this still plays. We have another customer that matches up our content recommendations and audiences using another software tool called Metadata. They have a product called MetaMatch that says, okay, I got an email address or whatever, I can add Facebook and their Google ad ID and all this other stuff. And they're pushing this content out all over the place. And it's been incredibly performant for them. And they kept going and going and going. And the reason that it's working is A, because the audience is small and the content recommendations tight. You don't do it for long, right? And two, there's diversification. It's these 800 people on this piece of content today. It's these 400 people on this piece of content tomorrow. And as those people start to engage with you, people you aren't even targeting necessarily are going to end up seeing that stuff because they're following you and they're interested and they engage with your content. So it starts to come up more in their feed as LinkedIn's algorithm starts to serve that stuff up. So it's really a virtuous cycle. The more you do it and the more specific you are between the content and the audience, the better everything else goes.
Yeah. And I know we're obviously living in a time it's becoming difficult to measure a lot of these things because of all the privacy rules and things like that. And it's only going to get worse, I think, in 2024 and beyond. So how do we justify, especially these early days of experimental things that we're describing? And I certainly see the value and I trust that it is the way to go, right? You certainly want to be a resource for your customers and you provide value before you ask for anything. That's right. And I think you have to spend some money if you want to promote some content and get in front of people faster than you could organically reach. But oftentimes your CFO and your CEO and some of the senior leadership really don't care about the logic behind any of those. They just want to know how much in opportunity have you created, how many deals have you closed? And sometimes it's very hard to measure some of those things in especially some of these reporting platforms, right? So how do we justify that? And how do we at least show them some positive signals that it is actually helping?
Yeah. So this question is on the mind, I think, of every B2B marketer. And I'll start from a first premise of, I think most measurement has ruined marketing. I think we have measured our way into mediocrity by and large. And I think the best marketing organizations are behaving in ways that are immeasurable, right? And they're outpacing the vast majority of their competitive sets, right? You hear about guys like Dave Gerhardt talking about brand. There's so few people who even really understand the subject matter of brand marketing within B2B. But those who do, they're running juggernauts, right? There are people, when they think about Salesforce, they think about their life. That is what they've built their life on. And Salesforce is all about brand and reaching out and Dreamforce and what the experiences, wrapping their arms around their audience. Profound. How do you measure that? Stop. Just please stop measuring it. And I think that if you're going to do anything, getting into your sales calls and asking somebody like, hey, how do you hear about us? And that's where the quote unquote dark social or whatever anybody wants to call this nonsense anymore. But that's where that stuff will come out. And I'm always flabbergasted. It's, I was listening to a podcast and you were talking about the thing, or I actually saw some posts from you out on LinkedIn and then, or a friend recommended me. That's how all this is happening. But I think there's also another piece of the puzzle here, which is how we think about the way that we build campaigns. So it goes back to that idea I mentioned before. If we start promoting thought leadership, and then we go to activate. One of the most amazing things that any marketing team can prove is I have an audience that I pushed thought leadership campaign content to on LinkedIn, and I did it for 4 weeks. And then midway through the third week, I started hitting those people in their inboxes with cold, but direct, cold, content-centric campaigns. I promise you're going to find that your cold open rates and your cold click rates are better with that approach. Does it specifically show that it came from LinkedIn? No, but you can control some of these things. And I think if you control them and have these small experiments where I did a cold campaign without the LinkedIn promotional stuff, then I did a cold campaign with it. I promise you're going to find the data that's going to let you say, look, we generated double the meetings when we spent a month warming these people up as opposed to when we didn't. And it's pretty intuitive when you think about it. Oh yeah, I'm like familiar and I know the name and so I'm all right to open, right? It's not hard to grok, but in terms of proving, I think the best thing that we can do is experiment and actually ask, right, those people who are coming on to sales calls, how and why they got there.
Going into 2024, what are some of the things that you're going to double down on from your experience and what you seem to have worked? and also things that you're just going to not waste your energy on?
No major event sponsorships for us next year. It's a lot of money. It's an incredible volume of effort. You're one in a million. Side events, yes. Small, intimate things. Interested? Yeah, I think those create demand, especially early stage businesses. 2, content marketing. So we have a massive content push over the course of this coming year. As you would expect, we care about content. We think it matters and should be working better for everybody. So we're leaning way into our content strategy, less on SEO, right? So search is something that we'll optimize content for after it's been created. But what we really want to do is write for our audience around the things that we know that they're interested in. So starting from the center and optimizing out, as opposed from starting out and then trying to pull it down. And then frankly, more on social, right? More and more on social, and giving ourselves more signals off of what's happening on social to let us trigger outbound that works really well. So it continues to be content, it continues to be intimacy as much as possible from this big age of machinery. I'm still really committed to social, and I think frankly we're just starting to figure out how big of a deal it is. Now the question is, how do you, again, stay relevant, stay interesting, stay true to your message, be relevant and value add? And it ain't generative AI. It just isn't. It's going to take people working really hard to create super valuable assets. And I think that's going to be the big separator between the winners and losers in the year or two to come, is whether or not people get oversold on generative tools and generate their way out of good quality demand.
And how are you going to prioritize between like written content versus just visuals, whether it be like some sort of some static images or some carousel versus actual video? How are you going to prioritize on that?
I can't tell you. So we'll be pretty experimental on that too. So formats are something that we're still trying to figure out how we'll play with those. I got to tell you, we have a pod of our own, and it's been really fascinating to use that as a way to meaningfully create truly differentiated original content, and then drafting a lot of our other content off of that core resource. But in terms of formats, I think that's a place where generative AI does help. I think that's a place where I have something truly unique and remarkable here. Help me propagate that into these other formats, in posts that could be carousels or could be videos or could be any number of different things. But we're playing. I think the formats are something that we'll continue to play with, but we know where and we know what we want to talk about. The formats, tons of experimentation, and frankly, as soon as you figure it out, it tends to change again.
And I'm curious to learn too, with you having actual customers using a platform to distribute their content, to personalize the, making it relevant to the end customers or the prospects. If you have any sort of learnings that you can create some sort of an industry report and share that too, because obviously we're all trying to figure it all out, right? And I think we all, the prediction is the short form video content is going to really be taken off in 2024, which we're seeing a big push toward that. I think LinkedIn is still pretty early on the short form videos. It's still a lot of text based, and I'm seeing that to be the case on YouTube and then obviously TikTok and some of the other platforms. So I'm just curious if you actually have any other B2B mediums that's going to really perform well in 2024 and beyond, right? So if you have some sort of industry report that you can prepare based on your customer data, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you asked that. I would say that the vast majority of our customers are all executing in the same places and fairly similar motions. And so the diversity of that data as it stands in terms of channels and formats is pretty limited. But it's a really interesting comment, because the volume of data that exists across our customers is unbelievable, right? Absolutely unbelievable. Tens of millions of new data points every single week. But if you ask in terms of where I think that there's going to be some interesting experimentation, oddly enough, I actually think that TikTok, to your point about short form video, I think TikTok is going to be an unbelievable B2B channel, and people are going to start to figure it out, and they probably won't figure it out until the back half of next year. And even then it's going to be slow moving. But the people who get on there soon, I'm already seeing some stuff on TikTok. I think that CPCs over there are going to be world-class, absolutely world-class.
Makes sense. Obviously, you're a business leader, you're a product leader, you're CEO, co-founder. There's so many responsibilities on your plate. Where do you find time to do everything that you need to do? What are some of the productivity hacks that you have that other entrepreneurs can probably try to adapt?
Yeah, you know what it is? I think a lot of it is about how well we're listening to our gut, right? You sit there and you go, oh God, I've been trying to move that rock up that hill for so long. 9 times out of 10, just let the rock roll down the hill. Forget it. I'm up the wrong hill, or it's the wrong rock, or just cut it out. There's only so long that you can play Sisyphus before everything really starts to fall apart for you. And I think the sooner you can recognize that you're moving either the wrong rock or you're up the wrong hill, the better. It is aggressive recalibration and rethinking of priorities as often as possible. I think all really successful founders and growth scale company leaders aggressively prioritize. And sure, of course, we got 48 great ideas. We can do 3 of them. And taking a beat, breathing, and going, okay, what are the 3? And then just making sure that those happen as efficiently and effectively as humanly possible, and then getting back to the other 45. But I tell you, more often than not, the other 45, half of them fall out of favor by the time you get back around to them as well. So I tend not to lose too much sleep over the things that we're not doing.
Yeah, we talked about a couple of ideas before the podcast started too. Certainly there's no lack of ideas. It's just the time to execute. That's our challenge. Knowing what you know today, what advice would you give the younger Nick?
Cool. I'll tell you, I think one, I messed up my first startup around A, not leaning long enough and hard enough into customer acceptance, and B, being terrified of services. All of our early customers had services agreements. We were getting paid to figure out that our product was working and in what ways on behalf of our customers. And in the ways in which the product wasn't performant, we put humans in between where the product ended and where the value proposition got delivered, and then just tried to keep building our way out of that gap. And I was convinced that if we had a big services offering, that our valuation would suck and VCs would hate us and we'd never get a good valuation, which is a ridiculous concept to have when you're just trying to make sure you're making enough money to eat. Because you get to the other side and it's ignore that revenue. Who cares? Now we've actually got our product. Now we can do what we're going to do. And I wish I'd figured that out a lot sooner. Mm-hmm. But I think that the networking protocol that I've been following across my career, I was early to LinkedIn, try to call, text, be helpful as often as possible. I'm really happy that I've done that since day one. And I would tell anybody else who's earlier in their career, the sooner you figure out that adding value to people who maybe aren't in a position to add value to you, that's going to be your superpower, the further and farther you're going to go.
Yeah, but sometimes we want quick, fast, immediate return, right? And so we get focused on that, and oftentimes we overlook that simple principle. Nick, I certainly enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your life lessons and wisdom with our audience.
Oh man, Samuel, so please come on. Thank you so much for having me.
Certainly.
If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.